1. I loved this place. It was home away from home, but what is home if there aren't spooky ghosts terrorizing you and the kids you are watching? The next story I have happened on a different side of camp than my previous story. This one is probably my most terrifying experience. This one had tent units. One unit I stayed in was a Sosawa, full name, I know. Right next to it was Sky High. I stayed in Sky High all summer the year before. The two were connected by a very small trail, and I stayed in the tent right next to the trail. I stayed all summer, but I never heard this. The tents are on a wooden platform, and the only protection is a thick canvas propped up by 2 wooden beams. Something we do is roll up the front flaps, back flaps, and the sides. This is called a floating tent, and is a godsend during the hot, humid summer nights, especially when it rains. One night in Asasawa, we counselors were in our tents the night before campers got there. It was silent, and no one was staying in Sky High. It was just me and one other person. I had grown up at this camp, so I wasn't too bothered, until the pacing started. On the trail connecting us to Sky High, someone was pacing back and forth. A tent was next to ours, blocking the view of the trail. I heard them moving closer and closer, but they stopped right before they would have stepped into view, as though they knew I was watching. They began to walk back, then they came closer again, and stopped and walked back. I woke up my co-worker and the pacing stopped. She told me it was a deer and went back to sleep. Let me tell you something about this camp's deer. They are the most clumsy, ungraceful things you will ever see. They crash all over the woods, but they don't drag their feet. This was not a deer. I have experienced some things at this camp, but this is the only one that still brings me to tears. I'm tearing up as I write this. I had never been so scared up until that point. All night something would pace and stop right before it got into view and walk back. Back and forth all night. Each time I woke up my co-worker, it stopped until she fell back asleep. Feet dragging in the leaves, footsteps all night. I wanted to scream. I cried all night. It didn't stop even when the sun came up. Feeling encouraged by the rising sun, I steeled myself and ran to the trail, ready to do what, I'm not sure. There was nothing. I heard it walking away, I could hear it, but the leaves didn't move. Nothing moved. I could hear it moving, until it stopped. Luckily, I never stayed there again. Never had the issue in Sky High. 2. It was 2009. I dropped out of college due to some financial issues and stayed with my sister and my brother-in-law. They welcomed me warmly, probably because they were tired of each other's faces. I was 17, and my plan was to kill time, 6 months, until I reached 18 so that I could apply for the job I wanted. On the second day of my stay, I already noticed something eerie. Footsteps on the second floor. It was vacated. I looked at them and asked them what it was. They looked at me and smiled, as if I should already know what it is. My brother-in-law owned the house, and his brother used to live upstairs. He was already in the US at that time. The way the second floor was set up was similar with the first, minus the stairs. Small kitchen, living room, door, stairs. The stairs were just right in front of our door. Every single night we hear footsteps upstairs, and it starts around 9 to 10 p.m. It stops around 3 to 4 a.m. And even though I'd been hearing it every night, it wasn't something we could ignore. It's not repetitive. It had behavior. It's sporadic. It's doing something else every night. It's not just walking, it's brisk walking, and sometimes running. There was one night when it became disturbingly loud. Me and my sister went outside out of sheer fear. And almost every night we talked about it. You'd never get used to it. The ceiling that divides the floors was also wood, so it sounded very, very clear. There was always this tension among us with the thought that one night it might walk down. I'm an atheist, and already was. I was skeptical of what it was, but I hadn't really made an effort to disprove it until the second or third month. They cleaned up the second floor every month, and they asked me to help. That's when the thought to examine it came. First, I thought it was a cat. I knew it was a stupid guess because the big footsteps can't be a cat. Second, I thought it was a neighbor. We shared the same wall, so while they were upstairs cleaning, I was downstairs intently and carefully listening to their footsteps. There was no denying it. The thing was coming from upstairs. I remember having goosebumps, hearing how close the sound of the footsteps was to the ones they're making. Camera wasn't an option. I really wish it was. I had no money to buy one, they didn't have one either, and my phone was an old Nokia. And even if I had a camera, I'd be too scared to watch it. I really hope I was only hearing my sis and bro's footsteps at that time. One night, something made it very, very clear that something was upstairs. We heard the sofa move. It was a heavy sound, which was actually the sound of a sofa when it rubs against a wooden floor. That was the first time. Also, if it was human for 6 months, we should have heard something else besides footsteps and that one move. Around the 4th month, my brother-in-law was already preparing to fly to the US and reside there. And that's probably why they wanted me there in the first place. My sister would have no one else with her. She had to wait until her papers were ready in order to migrate. Extremely fortunately, also around this time, our power line was cut. They were using jumpers, as we call it. They were taking power illegally without paying for it. They got caught. They were fined a big sum, but they didn't want to pay it because my sister was moving to their other house anyway. They were going to sell this one. Great. Now we had no power. We'd been without power for a month, and were using candles every damn night. My brother-in-law took his flight to the US, and this shit happened. My sister had to go to the other house and had it prepared for the move. For 2 damn days. They asked me to stay and watch over the house, which was not really around a reputable neighborhood. So I did. I'm a real man and an atheist. What could possibly happen? When the night bit the sky, I lit all the fucking candles I could find, probably 8. I stayed away from the clock, and I concentrated on reading and killing the time, tiring my eyes fast so I could sleep as soon as possible. I started hearing it. It was getting louder. Then I got thirsty. I went out of the room, their room, which was just right in the kitchen. My room was beside theirs. When I gulped the water, I accidentally looked up and saw the time. It was 11:30 p.m. Shit. I took a gander of the living room and saw the candles were about to die. I had to make a very, very difficult decision. Go to the living room and renew the candles, or run back to the room and let the darkness come in, allowing the footsteps to find my room. I'm a real man and an atheist, so I decide to change the candles. The footsteps had become increasingly loud by this time. Its loudest was at 1 or 2 a.m. The brisk walking began. It was going for the door and then back to the kitchen. Going for the door and then back to the kitchen. When I changed the 3rd candle, it was going for the door and then back, and then stopped in the middle. Silence. My heart was throbbing like crazy. I started sweating. I was only in my boxers. Then back to the kitchen. And a quick run to the door and to the stairs. Tug, 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 tug! The footsteps were on the fucking stairs. I breathed all the air I could. Ran to the kitchen. Opened the secondary door and sprinted out as far as I could. I sat down on a nearby rock and tried to get my shit back together, catching my breath. I was outside for 4 fucking hours almost naked. I questioned my sanity while I was outside. I tried to pretend it was just my imagination. But no, it did happen. It came down. It's probably the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. But now I look back, and somehow I am thankful something like that happened to me. It kinda helped me cope when life became too banal. Although generally I don't know what to feel about it. Something disturbs me to this day. The more I think about it, the more I don't want to think about it. And that is It seemed like they actually knew what's upstairs. We left the house on my 7th month. I think they already sold it. May the new owner love the footsteps. 3. When I was 13, I ran away from home for personal reasons. Booked it to a local nature trail in the middle of a wildlife reserve. I ran down it, and about 15 minutes in, a hand reached out from the bush to my right and hit me in the chest. I got back up and looked for my attacker, but there was nothing there. I proceeded to run home, crying like a real man. When I was 15, I was laying in bed scrolling through creepypasta articles when I hear a sort of rhythmic tapping on my window. I freak the fuck out and pretend I can't hear it for a while, until I can't stand it anymore and pull the curtain back. It's only a raccoon. I hit the window and scare him off and try to calm myself down. About half an hour later, the same tapping, same rhythm, same pattern. Kinda went like click click scratch, click click scratch. So I decide I'm gonna shoot the raccoon with a BB gun so he won't come back. I grab my BB gun, open the window, take aim, and there's a shadowy figure vaguely resembling a man staring right at me. Right on the border of my lawn that connects my yard to the huge expanse of woods around my house. And it just stares at me and slowly walks into the woods behind it. After that, I didn't sleep for about a week. Fall last year. On a walk down the nature trail with 2 of my friends, Antoine and Justin, at like 4 a.m. because we're horror movie cliches. We'd been drinking, cracking jokes, great time. On the walk back home, I feel this awful presence. I look behind me and I see something at the end of the trail in the distance. My vision isn't the best, but from what I could tell, it looked like a man with a deer's head as his own. So I looked away. Told my friends not to say a word until we got home. Justin knew of my past occurrences. And he doesn't really fuck with paranormal stuff, so he listened and just kept walking. Now here's a list of things I have heard and read about wendigos and skinwalkers. They possess and steal people's bodies. You're not supposed to think or talk about them. So good luck, you guys. There's an overwhelming smell of blood and sulfur when they're present. They mimic other people's movements in erratic or strange ways. They don't get social tendencies. But Antoine just looked at me for like 15 minutes while walking perfectly straight. I freaked out. Started doing the strangest movements of my arms to see if he would mimic them, and every time he would. At one point, I locked both my arms and put them on my head, and he did the exact same thing. I was ready to just leave him in the woods that night, honestly. Eventually he screamed something completely unintelligible, and it scared the shit out of me. So I threw a punch at him and he dodged it. I apologized, told him to shut up, and told them all to run home with me. When we got there, we discussed what we saw and what happened, and Antoine said he completely blacked out as soon as we started walking the nature trail, only to wake up to me throwing a punch at him. About 2 months ago, this is where I drew the line. I've moved since this incident, and I honestly don't plan on going back ever. I was walking down the nature trail again. Clearly I hadn't learned my lesson. Listening to music, having a good time. This thick, like permeable smell of blood hits my nose, and I genuinely thought I had a nosebleed for a second. Until through my headphones, I hear someone talking. I take off one of my headphones and have a look around. Nothing. Speed walking out of there, it happens again. This time it sounds exactly like a man screaming Warbringer. Instantly I'm on the verge of tears and I jerk back to look around as fast as possible, and I see it. There's a fully naked man, resembling more of a corpse than a man, with a bleeding, rotting horse's head. His arm was extended outward to me. I ran home and packed my shit. Now by this point I have so many theories as to what happened, but I hate indulging in them. They all scare the hell out of me. My current idea is that I'm just fucking crazy. I'm not sure, but whatever the case, if there's anyone on here who has any explanation as to what any of it was, I'm very open to it. 4. A little preface. I have always been on the sensitive side of the paranormal, ranging from just knowing something that I shouldn't, to seeing stuff. I don't usually talk about this kind of stuff since most people around me dismiss it as my imagination or I was dreaming. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was deployed in Afghanistan in October of 2011. I was on FOB, Forward Operating Base, Hansen, for the first few months, and FOB Jackson for the last few months before getting moved to Camp Leatherneck for the last month-ish when our replacements showed up. My job was to operate the laundry service as well as provide clean water for showers, technically not clean enough to drink, but you could, for US and Afghani troops. After the first month or so in Hansen, whenever I tried to sleep, I could feel a hand grabbing at my calf and slowly work its way up. I immediately dismissed it as being a result from stress or a sleep paralysis type thing, and it would kind of subside since it wasn't a very strong feeling at all. This happened for a night or two a week, but eventually stopped. Fast forward to when I was on Leatherneck. Nothing happened when I was at Jackson or even my short trip to Noli, so I forgot about what happened. At this point, a lot of real-life stuff had happened, and I was having issues going to sleep. So I would play music in some earbuds, or I would rewatch a movie in my head. Basically anything to get my mind off of the day's events. I slept in a room with 2 to 4 other people, so depending on who was there, I would try to be considerate, especially with the not ideal layout of the 6 or so bunk beds. There was an emergency exit sign above the door that glowed a soft orangey red, important later. One of the nights when I was running something in my head, 100% awake, eyes closed, no headphones, I heard 2 people, male and female, talking. This was not something I could imagine at all, but I was curious since I could hear them quite clearly. The conversation in my head went something like this. Hi. What are you guys up to? We're just looking around. Where are you from? We work for... It says some not human name. You work for... I attempt to say the name. No, silly. The woman slaps my sleeping bag. I immediately prop myself up at my elbow and look down at my sleeping bag, and there is a handprint in the fabric. Old 3-part puffy sleeping system, where I felt the slap, and it was at an angle that no one in the room could have gotten at. The other 2 were passed out with headphones on the other side of the room, and there was no one else besides the 3 of us in there. At this point, I noped the fuck out for a smoke, and when I returned, put in some headphones and went to sleep. 2 nights later, I had the worst dream to date. I hope it was a dream anyways. I woke up in my bed and noticed that the normally orange light was blue. There was a faint electrical buzz, and there was a figure standing in the light. It was a solid black figure, no discernible facial features, and I could see an outline of it, and it looked like a British boy from around the early 1900s based on the outfit. When I looked at it, I felt the worst sense of fear and dread ever. You could tell me that I had to go drive a car over a landmine, and I wouldn't feel like this. After a few seconds, I just drifted back to sleep, and nothing occurred for the rest of the time there. 5. Ever since I was young, my grandmother would always tell us scary stories to try to freak me and my sister out. Often when she would go do laundry in the basement, we'd come with her, and a series of lights were on, only to show a very pitch-black rest of the basement for a couple yards. She would always stop us and make us stare into the distance while we were under the protection of the light, and point to the blackness saying, "Do you see him? Right there, the boogeyman." I would always quake and shiver as a child with interest, while my oldest sister would burst into tears. I always passed it off as my imagination, but I felt I could always see a faint black outline among the black, and just the slightest glimmer of red eyes in the very far back. Fast forward 10 or so years, and my sister and her boyfriend have made a section of the basement a living quarter with large slabs up rugs for walls. Best options when you're low on money and trying to get somewhat of a head start on independence. Anyways, the slabs of rugs met together to close and create this corner section that made a door. Basically, by walking through the 2 slits, you would enter their room. They had a couch by this area, and I, at the time, was sitting downstairs on their couch, watching TV and hanging out. Well, my sister decided to go upstairs for a moment to talk to my grandmother, while her boyfriend stayed downstairs but was sitting in bed on his phone across the room, A couple minutes go by, and I get this weird static-like feeling of somebody walking towards me on the other side of the rug. You know the feeling when something or someone is suddenly in your presence and you can just feel it before you even see it? It was that feeling. I also thought I heard faint footsteps and think to myself it must be my sister trying to sneak up on me and scare me like she always tried to do, since I don't scare easy. I decided to shout all tough, "You can't scare me, I know you're walking this way, I can hear you." And with that, almost exactly at the same time, I finish my sentence. I hear my sister's voice upstairs through the thin, creaky wood of the house talking to my grandmother. I suddenly look over to her boyfriend who's looking at me like I'm a nutcase. And the figure I feel to the right of me gets taller, closer. My ears start ringing and I freeze, feeling a huge weight on my chest, unable to move. I could just feel something not even 1 foot away from me on the other side of the rug. And the only people who would be down there were all accounted for. After what felt like hours, more like 30 to 60 seconds of this pressure and presence near me, I could feel it back away as if it was walking backwards and the pressure over my body released. I was extremely shook, and when I tried to tell my sister or her boyfriend what happened, they refused to listen, because they didn't want me to freak them out since they were of course living down there. A few days later I'm upstairs now. I decide to tell my grandmother and dad sitting in the TV room what happened, because I know they both have experienced paranormal situations before. I mean, my grandmother lived in a haunted house when she was younger, but that's for a whole other story. Weird thing is, as soon as I started talking about this thing that happened to me in the basement, the TV gets all staticky and loses connection. I stop, and it goes back to normal, then start talking about it again, and the TV statics once again. Mind you, it was a bright sunny summer day, so nothing was particularly causing this that I knew of. My dad also took notice of the TV doing this and told me it was probably best to stop and not talk about it anymore. My grandmother nodded, telling me she understood, and that it's best not to mention it. Ever since, I haven't spoken more about this. My grandmother has passed away since then, and my sister and her boyfriend moved out. And I still have a huge fear about going down into that basement alone, ever again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 129. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And as has been the case for the past week or so, I am now done recording, and of course, silence. I'm trying to get my sleeping schedule kind of turned back to where it used to be, so I'm not getting up too early, so, yada yada. And that'll probably fix that problem for the most part anyway. The only downside is I might get woken up by construction people, whatever they happen to be doing. I don't even know what they're doing. Ah, well. Okay, I better be off to edit, and I'll probably have vlogs and things playing in the background. Oh, yes, I did, if you give me feedback, are the videos loud enough for you guys right now? I've been playing around with the settings a little bit because, new mic, want to make sure I'm getting the best out of it. I've made the recording levels, I've turned them up a little bit on these and on yesterday's glitch and today's paranormal recordings. I can turn it up a little bit more, but the fact of the matter is, the ones I did last weekend were much too loud, and there was clipping issues when editing, and that fixed that. Basically, I had the thing cranked all the way up and I hadn't even realised it. So let me know what you think, and if it's not loud enough, I can make it a little bit louder. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.